At 12 years old, I never thought I'd face the end of my life. But that moment arrived unexpectedly, carrying with it an experience that would change everything. What began as a simple headache soon became an unrelenting pain, accompanied by constant exhaustion. My parents initially dismissed it as stress or too much time spent in front of a screen. But as my condition worsened, they grew increasingly worried. After numerous visits to doctors and countless tests, the diagnosis was grim. It was a rare disease with no cure. And despite the best efforts of medical professionals, nothing seemed to halt its progression. My days became a blur of hospital visits and treatments that offered no relief. I grew weaker until I could no longer leave my bed. Doctors spoke in hushed tones outside my hospital room, using words like terminal and palliative care. Words I didn't fully understand but knew carried an undeniable weight. My parents stayed by my side, their smiles strained as they tried to hide their tears. I could see their heartbreak in the way they looked at me when they thought I wasn't watching. As I lay in the hospital bed, my body frail and my spirit weary, I thought of all the things I would never get to experience. I would never attend high school, fall in love, or live the life I had imagined for myself. A sense of unfairness washed over me, and I silently asked why this was happening. Exhausted by these thoughts, I drifted off into a fitful sleep, not realizing that my life was about to take a dramatic turn. When I opened my eyes, or at least what felt like my eyes, I wasn't in my hospital bed anymore. Instead, I was hovering above it. Looking down, I saw my lifeless body surrounded by frantic doctors and nurses working to revive me. My parents clung to my hands, their faces streaked with tears, their silent prayers filling the room with an intensity I could almost feel. Despite the scene below, I wasn't afraid or in pain. I felt weightless and strangely calm, as though I were simply observing a play from an entirely different perspective. Then, something caught my attention. A light appeared in the corner of the room. At first, it was faint, like a distant star, but it grew brighter and more inviting with each passing moment. It radiated warmth and love, pulling me toward it with an irresistible force. I moved effortlessly toward the light, leaving the hospital room behind. As I entered, all my pain, fear, and sadness evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of peace and joy. I felt freer and more alive than I ever had, even in my healthiest moments. The light gave way to a breathtaking scene, a garden so beautiful it defied description. The colors were unlike anything I had ever seen, more vibrant and alive than earthly hues. Flowers of every imaginable shape and color surrounded me, their fragrances mingling in the air, creating a scent that was both familiar and otherworldly. The grass beneath my feet was lush and soft, and a gentle breeze carried with it a melody so harmonious it seemed to flow from the very fabric of this place. As I stood there in awe, I became aware of a presence approaching me. A man dressed in a white robe that glowed with an inner light walked toward me. His face was kind, his eyes sparkling with love and wisdom. Though I had never seen him before, I recognized him instantly. This was Jesus, the figure I had learned about in church and Sunday school. But he was more real and more alive than anything I had ever known. "Welcome, my child," he said, his voice filled with warmth and compassion. "I've been waiting for you." Those words wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, and without hesitation, I ran to him. As he embraced me, I felt every fear and doubt melt away. His hug was like being surrounded by all the love in the universe. A love so complete and unconditional that it left no room for anything else. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly at peace. Jesus took my hand, and together we walked through the garden. Each step filled me with strength and vitality, washing away the weariness that had plagued me during my illness. It was as if I were being made whole again, not just in body but in spirit. As we walked, I noticed a tree with golden fruit hanging from its branches. The fruit glowed with an inner light, and I felt drawn to it. Jesus picked one of the fruits and handed it to me, his eyes twinkling with kindness. "Eat," he said, his voice gentle and reassuring. "This is the fruit of life." I took a bite, and the taste was beyond anything I could have imagined. It was sweet, yet each bite brought a new flavor, as though it contained the essence of every good thing I had ever tasted. As I ate, I felt a surge of energy and vitality coursing through me. It was a feeling of being more alive than I ever thought possible. As we continued our walk, I found myself filled with questions. Here I was, standing in the presence of Jesus, in a place that felt like heaven itself. I wanted to understand everything, why I was here, what was happening, and what it all meant. Tentatively, I asked, "Jesus, can I ask you some questions?" He smiled, his expression full of patience and understanding. "Of course, my child, what would you like to know?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure where to begin. My mind raced with questions about life, death, and the afterlife. But one question stood out above all the rest. It was something I had heard people talk about but had never fully understood. "When will the world end?" I asked, my voice small and uncertain. Jesus looked at me with eyes full of kindness and wisdom. "That's a big question," he said gently. "The end of the world is not something to fear but something to look forward to. It means that I will return to make everything right. There will be signs, wars, natural disasters, and people turning away from God, but those who love God should not be afraid. Instead, they should focus on living with love and doing good." His words filled me with a mixture of awe and curiosity. I wanted to know more, to understand what would happen after the world ended. "What happens after that?" I asked, my voice filled with wonder. Jesus smiled, his expression radiant with joy. "After the end, there will be a new heaven and a new earth. All the pain, sadness, and death of the old world will be gone. It will be a place of perfect harmony, where everyone who loves God will live with him forever." I listened intently, trying to absorb the magnitude of what he was saying. It sounded like the happy ending in a storybook, but I could sense that it was real. Far more real than anything I had ever experienced on earth. Yet, my mind returned to the people I cared about, some of whom didn't believe in God. "What about those who don't believe?" I asked, my heart heavy with concern. Jesus' expression grew somber, his eyes filled with compassion. "God loves everyone," he said gently. "He wants all his children to be with him. But he also gives them the choice. Those who choose not to be with God will be separated from him. That's why it's so important to share God's love with others while there is still time." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. It was a call to action, a reminder that the way I lived my life mattered not only for me but for those around me. My mind swirled with thoughts of how I could share this love and hope with others. How I could live in a way that reflected what I had experienced in this place. As Jesus and I continued walking through the breathtaking garden, I felt a growing sense of curiosity and wonder. I was standing with the Creator of all things, and I had the opportunity to ask him anything. My mind raced with questions, each one brimming with urgency. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if my questions were too small or trivial for someone so powerful and wise. But when I glanced at Jesus, his patient smile and kind eyes encouraged me to speak freely. "Jesus," I began cautiously, "why do bad things happen in the world? Why do people suffer?" Jesus stopped and looked at me with compassion. "My child," he said, "the world was created in love, and everything was made good. But humanity was given free will, the ability to choose. Love without choice is not love at all. Unfortunately, some choices have brought pain and brokenness into the world. But even in the midst of suffering, I am with you. I can bring healing, redemption, and purpose, even from the darkest moments." His words settled into my heart, offering comfort and understanding. Though the explanation didn't erase the existence of suffering, it helped me see that there was a bigger picture, one beyond what I could fully comprehend. We walked on, and I asked him another question that had been on my mind since I arrived in this heavenly place. "Jesus, what's the purpose of our lives on earth?" He smiled again, his face lighting up with joy. "The purpose of life is to love," he said simply. "Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love others as you love yourself. Everything else flows from these two things. Your life on earth is a journey of learning, growing, and sharing love. It prepares you for the eternal life that awaits." The simplicity of his answer caught me off guard. I had always thought life's purpose was complicated, something I might never fully understand. But here, in his presence, it felt clear and attainable. Love was the foundation of everything. Encouraged by his answers, I decided to ask something I had overheard adults talking about but had never fully understood. "When will the world end?" Jesus' expression softened, and he placed a hand on my shoulder. "No one knows the exact time," he said, "not the angels, not even I, only the Father knows. But the end of the world is not something to fear. It is a time of renewal. A time when I will return to make everything right." I nodded, though I still didn't fully understand. "But how will we know it's happening?" I asked. "There will be signs," Jesus explained. "You will hear of wars and natural disasters. People will turn away from God and toward selfishness. But those who love God should not be afraid. Instead, they should remain faithful, live with love, and be ready for my return." His words were reassuring, but they also carried a sense of urgency. I felt the weight of what he was saying, the importance of living each day with intention and purpose, of sharing love and faith with those around me. "What happens after the world ends?" I asked, unable to hide my curiosity. Jesus' eyes sparkled with joy as he answered, "After the end, there will be a new heaven and a new earth. All the pain, sadness, and death of the old world will be gone. It will be a place of perfect harmony, where everyone who loves God will live with him forever. The old will pass away, and everything will be made new." The thought of a new world filled me with hope. It sounded like the happy ending of a story, but I could tell it was far more real than any storybook. Yet, I couldn't stop thinking about the people I cared for, my friends and family, some of whom didn't believe in God. "What about the people who don't believe in God?" I asked hesitantly. Jesus' expression grew somber, and his voice was filled with compassion. "God loves everyone," he said. "He wants all his children to be with him, but he also gives them the freedom to choose. Those who choose to live apart from God will be separated from him. Not because he doesn't love them, but because love must be freely given and freely received." His words pierced my heart, filling me with both understanding and sadness. I realized how important it was to share God's love with others while there was still time. I silently resolved to be more open about my faith, to show love and kindness to everyone I met, in the hopes that they too might experience the peace and joy I had found. "So what should we do while we're waiting for the world to end?" I asked, eager to know how I could make a difference. Jesus smiled brightly, and his entire being seemed to radiate light. "Live your life with love," he said. "Love God with all your heart, and love others as you love yourself. Help those in need, forgive those who hurt you, and share God's love with everyone you meet. Pray, read the Word of God, and trust that I am always with you, even when you cannot see me." His words stayed with me as we continued our walk through the garden. Everywhere I looked, I saw glimpses of harmony and beauty. Animals played together without fear. People laughed and sang, and the air was filled with a sense of perfect peace. It was a reminder of what the world could be, what it was meant to be, and a glimpse of what the new heaven and earth would be like. As we walked, we came to a massive book resting on a golden stand. The book shimmered with light, its cover adorned with sparkling gems. "What is that?" I asked, pointing to the book. "That," Jesus said, "is the book of life. It contains the names of all who love God and follow him." I felt a mix of curiosity and nervousness as I looked at the book. "Is my name in there?" I asked quietly. Jesus smiled warmly and nodded. "Yes, it is," he said, "and so are the names of many others. But there is still room for more." His answer filled me with both relief and hope. I realized the significance of what he was saying, that it wasn't just about me but about all the people whose lives I could touch by sharing God's love. There was still time for others to be added to the book of life. We continued walking until we reached a crystal-clear river. The water sparkled like diamonds, reflecting the light in a dazzling display. "This is the river of life," Jesus said. "Its water brings life to everything in heaven." I bent down and touched the water, feeling its coolness against my skin. As I stood up, I felt even more alive, as if the water had filled me with an energy I couldn't describe. Everywhere I turned, I saw evidence of the harmony and joy that permeated this place. It was a world where love reigned supreme, where every being existed in perfect unity. Yet, even in this perfect place, Jesus reminded me of the work still to be done on earth. "No one knows when the world will end," he said, "but that's not the most important thing. What matters is how you live each day. Love God, love others, and be ready for my return." As his words settled into my heart, I felt both a sense of purpose and a longing to share what I had learned. Though I didn't want to leave this beautiful place, I understood that my time here was only temporary. I had a mission to fulfill. As Jesus and I continued walking through the radiant garden, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose growing within me. Every step alongside him brought clarity to the questions that had weighed on my heart. The truths he shared were not just answers to my questions, they were calls to action. Invitations to live differently, and challenges to bring more love into the world. I wanted to hold on to these moments forever, but I could feel that my time in this heavenly place was drawing to a close. Jesus stopped near the crystal-clear river we had walked along and turned to me. His eyes held a depth of love and understanding that made me feel safe, even as I prepared to hear what I instinctively knew was coming. "Sarah," he said gently, "you still have work to do on earth. It's not yet your time to stay here." A wave of sadness washed over me. I didn't want to leave. This place felt like home, more home than anything I had ever known. "Do I have to go back?" I asked, my voice trembling with both disappointment and fear. Jesus reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder. His touch radiated warmth and reassurance. "Yes, my child," he said with a soft smile. "There are people on earth who need to hear about God's love. You have a role to play in sharing what you've seen and experienced here. Through you, others may find hope and be reminded that they are not alone." His words filled me with a mixture of sadness and resolve. I didn't want to leave this perfect place, but I understood that my life still held purpose, even in the face of the challenges that awaited me back on earth. "Will it hurt to go back?" I asked, remembering the pain I had felt before arriving here. "No, it won't hurt," Jesus said, his voice filled with kindness. "And remember, I will always be with you. Even when you cannot see me, my love will guide you, and my presence will be with you in everything you do." As we began walking back through the garden, Jesus shared one last piece of advice that would stay with me for the rest of my life. "No one knows when the world will end," he said, his voice serious but gentle. "But that's not the most important thing. What matters is how you live each day. Live with love, show kindness, and share God's hope with others. Be ready, not out of fear, but out of love and joy for what is to come." His words resonated deeply, giving me a sense of clarity and focus I had never felt before. I realized that while the end of the world might hold mystery, the way I lived my life didn't have to. I could choose love every day. I could be a light to others, just as Jesus had been a light to me in this moment. As we approached the radiant light that had first drawn me into the garden, Jesus stopped and turned to me. "Are you ready?" he asked, his expression full of compassion and encouragement. I hesitated for a moment, taking one last look at the beauty around me, the vibrant flowers, the crystal-clear river, the animals living in perfect harmony, and the glowing warmth of this place. It was difficult to leave, but I knew that this wasn't goodbye. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady with determination. Jesus smiled and wrapped me in one final embrace. "Go with my blessing," he said, "and remember, I love you always." With those words, I felt myself being drawn back through the light. The colors of the garden blurred into a soft glow. And then, suddenly, I was back in my body. My eyes opened, and I was greeted by the sight of my parents, their faces wet with tears. "Sarah," my mother cried, holding me close, "we thought we'd lost you." My father's voice was choked with emotion as he stroked my hair. "It's a miracle," he said, his words barely above a whisper. The doctors rushed into the room, astonished to find me awake. They ran test after test, but none of them could explain what had happened. My illness, which had been terminal just moments before, was gone without a trace. They called it a spontaneous remission, but I knew the truth. I had been healed in heaven. As the days passed and I regained my strength, I couldn't stop thinking about my experience. I shared every detail with my parents, describing the garden, the light, and my time with Jesus. At first, they were skeptical, unsure if my story was real or simply a hallucination. But as I spoke, their skepticism faded, the clarity and conviction in my voice, the vividness of my descriptions, and the peace I carried convinced them that what I had experienced was genuine. "Mom," I said one evening as we sat together in the hospital room, "I can still feel the peace of that place. I can still hear the music and smell the flowers. And Jesus, he was so kind, so full of love. My mother squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening with tears. I believe you, sweetie, she said softly. God works in mysterious ways. My father nodded, his voice filled with emotion. We're just so grateful to have you back with us. As I prepared to return home and resume my life, I couldn't shake the sense of responsibility Jesus had placed on my heart. His words echoed in my mind. Share God's love with others. I resolved to live each day with intention, spreading kindness and hope wherever I went. My experience in the garden had transformed me, and I knew I could never go back to living the way I had before. Returning to life after my experience in the garden with Jesus felt surreal. Everything seemed different. The hospital room, once sterile and oppressive, now felt bright and full of potential. The rhythmic beeping of the machines and the voices of doctors and nurses no longer made me anxious. Instead, they reminded me of the second chance I had been given. As I regained my strength and prepared to leave the hospital, I realized I had a new mission, to live with love and purpose. As Jesus had instructed, the world outside the hospital looked brighter, more vivid, and alive. The sunlight filtering through the trees seemed to shimmer with the same beauty I had seen in the garden. The hum of everyday life felt like a harmonious song, a reminder of the interconnectedness of all things, even the small, mundane details of life, a smile from a stranger, the sound of children laughing, the smell of fresh bread from a bakery, seemed imbued with deeper meaning. At first, I wasn't sure how to begin sharing the message of God's love with others. I was still just a child, and I worried that people might not take me seriously. But I remembered Jesus' words. Live your life with love. Help those in need. Share God's hope. I realized I didn't have to start with grand gestures. I could begin with the small acts of kindness that were within my reach. Back at school, I noticed how my perspective on others had changed. I saw my classmates not just as peers but as people with their own struggles, joys, and fears. I found myself drawn to those who seemed lonely or excluded, offering a kind word or a listening ear. To my surprise, these small acts often led to meaningful connections. One girl, Emma, confided in me that she often felt invisible and unloved. I told her about my experience in the garden and how Jesus' love had transformed me. Her eyes widened as she listened, and though she didn't fully understand, she told me later that my story gave her hope. At home, I noticed changes in myself as well. I was more patient with my younger siblings, more understanding of my parents' struggles, and more grateful for the simple blessings of everyday life. I started helping out more, doing chores without being asked, and finding ways to bring joy to my family. Whether it was baking cookies, drawing pictures, or simply spending time with them, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment in these moments. As time went on, I sought out ways to make a difference in my community. I joined a youth group at our church and began participating in service projects. One of our first projects was volunteering at a local homeless shelter. At first, I was nervous, unsure of how to connect with people whose lives seemed so different from mine. But as I served meals and listened to their stories, I realized that we all shared the same longing for love, acceptance, and hope. Many of them were deeply touched by my story, and some even asked me to pray with them. One day, while serving at the shelter, an elderly man with kind eyes approached me. "You've seen something, haven't you?" he asked, his voice gentle but certain. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. He smiled knowingly. "I can see it in your eyes," he said. "You've been to the other side. You've seen heaven." His words startled me, but they also brought a sense of comfort. "Yes," I admitted softly. "I was there. I met Jesus." He nodded, his expression filled with understanding. "I've been there too," he said. "It changes you, doesn't it? Makes you see the world differently." We talked for hours that day, sharing our experiences and the lessons we had learned. His presence reminded me that I wasn't alone, that others had glimpsed the same truths I had. Our conversation strengthened my resolve to continue sharing my story, even when it felt difficult or uncomfortable. At school, I began speaking more openly about my experience. Some of my friends were curious and asked thoughtful questions, while others dismissed it as a dream or a figment of my imagination. I didn't let the skepticism discourage me. I focused on planting seeds of hope, trusting that even small acts of love and faith could make a difference. One day, during lunch, Emma asked me a question that had been weighing on her mind. "What happens to people who don't believe in God?" she asked hesitantly. I remembered Jesus' words about choice and love. God loves everyone, I explained gently. He wants everyone to be with him, but he gives us the freedom to choose. That's why it's so important to share his love with others, so they can make that choice for themselves. Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I've never really thought about God before," she admitted, "but the way you talk about him makes me want to know more." Her words filled me with a sense of purpose. I realized that sharing God's love wasn't about convincing people or winning arguments. It was about living in a way that reflected his kindness and compassion. It was about being a light in the lives of others, just as Jesus had been a light in mine. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself growing in faith and love. I started volunteering at an animal shelter, inspired by the peaceful harmony I had seen among the animals in heaven. I joined my church's community outreach programs, helping to organize food drives and clothing donations for families in need. Each act of service, no matter how small, felt like a step closer to fulfilling the mission Jesus had given me. But it wasn't always easy. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, unsure if I was making a difference. There were days when I faced rejection or skepticism, and I questioned whether my efforts mattered. In those moments, I remembered Jesus' promise, "I will always be with you." I found strength in prayer, asking for guidance and trusting that God was working through me in ways I couldn't always see. One evening, as I sat in my room reflecting on my journey, I realized how much my perspective on life had changed. Before my near-death experience, I had taken so much for granted: my family, my friends, even the simple beauty of a sunny day. Now, every moment felt like a gift, an opportunity to live with purpose and gratitude. I was no longer afraid of the future or the unknown. Instead, I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that my life was part of something greater. As I continued to integrate the profound experience I'd had with Jesus into my life, I found myself viewing the world through a completely different lens. Every aspect of life, no matter how mundane, now seemed to carry eternal significance. I understood that my actions, words, and even my thoughts could create ripples far beyond what I could see. Living with this awareness brought a new sense of responsibility, but also a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. One of the most significant changes was how I approached my relationships. Before my near-death experience, I had often been quick to judge or hold grudges. But now, I couldn't shake the memory of Jesus' unwavering love and forgiveness. It inspired me to see others through his eyes, with compassion, patience, and a willingness to forgive. I began to mend relationships that had been strained, reaching out to people I had once avoided or misunderstood. Each act of reconciliation felt like a step toward creating the harmony I had witnessed in heaven. One relationship that transformed was with my older brother. We had always butted heads, our differences creating a wall between us. After my experience, I felt a strong urge to repair that bond. One afternoon, I sat down with him and shared my story in detail, including the message Jesus had given me about living with love and forgiveness. To my surprise, he listened intently, his usual skepticism giving way to curiosity. By the end of our conversation, he admitted that he had been struggling with his own feelings of guilt and doubt. That moment of vulnerability became the foundation for a renewed closeness between us. In my community, I began looking for ways to make a tangible difference. I volunteered at local shelters and food banks, remembering Jesus' words about helping those in need. Each act of service, no matter how small, felt like an offering of love and gratitude for the second chance I had been given. Whether it was packing meals, sorting clothing donations, or simply listening to someone's story, I felt a profound connection to the people I served. Their struggles reminded me of the importance of hope, and their resilience inspired me to keep going, even on days when I felt discouraged. At school, I continued to share my story with friends and classmates. Though not everyone was receptive, some dismissed it as a dream or a hallucination, while others were intrigued but hesitant to engage. I didn't let the skepticism deter me. Instead, I focused on being an example of the love and kindness Jesus had shown me. I found that actions often spoke louder than words. Simple gestures, like offering a helping hand, standing up for someone being bullied, or showing genuine interest in someone's feelings, opened doors for deeper conversations about faith and hope. One of the most profound encounters happened during a school project. I was paired with a girl named Mia, who was known for her tough exterior and sharp tongue. At first, I was intimidated, unsure how to connect with her. But as we worked together, I learned that her harsh demeanor was a defense mechanism, hiding years of pain and insecurity. Gradually, I began to share bits of my story, not to preach, but to offer her a glimpse of the peace and love I had experienced. One day, she confided in me about her struggles with her family and her feelings of unworthiness. I listened without judgment and told her that she was deeply loved, not just by those around her but by God. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Do you really believe that?" "I don't just believe it," I said softly. "I know it, and I think deep down, you know it too." That conversation marked the beginning of a friendship that would change both of our lives. Mia started opening up more, not just to me, but to others. She began to let go of the walls she had built and allowed herself to experience love and connection. Seeing her transformation reminded me of the power of small acts of kindness and the importance of being present for others. As the months passed, I began to notice how my perspective on time had shifted. Before my experience, I often worried about the future, about school, friendships, and all the milestones I thought I needed to achieve. But now, I understood that each moment was a gift, an opportunity to live with purpose and gratitude. Instead of rushing through life, I started savoring the little things, the warmth of the sun on my face, the laughter of my friends, the simple joy of being alive. This newfound perspective also changed how I approached challenges. When difficulties arose, I no longer felt overwhelmed or hopeless. Instead, I saw them as opportunities for growth and learning. I remembered Jesus' words about suffering and free will, and how even the darkest moments could be transformed into something meaningful. This mindset helped me face setbacks with resilience and faith, trusting that God's plan was greater than my limited understanding. One of the most surprising changes was how I viewed death. Before my experience, the thought of dying had filled me with fear and uncertainty. But now, I saw it as a transition, not an end. I knew that the peace and love I had experienced in heaven awaited everyone who chose to embrace it. This understanding gave me a sense of freedom, allowing me to live fully without being paralyzed by fear of the unknown. My journey also deepened my prayer life. Instead of reciting prayers out of obligation, I began talking to God as if He were a close friend. I shared my thoughts, fears, and joys with Him, knowing that He was always listening. Prayer became a source of comfort and strength, a way to stay connected to the love and guidance I had experienced in heaven. I also began praying for others, lifting up their struggles and asking for God's light to shine in their lives. One evening, as I sat outside watching the stars, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. I thought about Jesus' words, "No one knows when the world will end, but what matters is how you live each day." Those words had become a guiding principle in my life. They reminded me to focus on what truly mattered: loving God, loving others, and making the most of the time I had been given. As I looked up at the vast expanse of the night sky, I felt a quiet but powerful sense of connection to something greater than myself. The stars seemed to whisper a message of hope and eternity, a reminder that the journey I had begun in the garden with Jesus was far from over. My time on earth was a part of a much larger story, one that stretched beyond what I could see or comprehend. As my journey continued, the lessons I had learned during my near-death experience became woven into the fabric of my daily life. I embraced my role as a messenger of hope, sharing the love and light I had encountered in heaven with everyone I met. This wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, resistance, and even ridicule, but through it all, I held on to the assurance that my purpose was part of something much greater than myself. One of the first challenges I faced was finding the courage to speak about my experience in a way that others could understand. Some people were open and curious, eager to learn more about what I had seen and felt. Others were skeptical, dismissing my story as a figment of my imagination or a side effect of medical trauma. At first, their disbelief stung, and I found myself questioning whether I was doing the right thing by sharing my story. But each time I prayed about it, I felt a renewed sense of clarity and resolve. This wasn't about convincing others, it was about planting seeds of hope, trusting that God would nurture them in His own time. One day, I was invited to speak at a local church. Standing in front of the congregation, I felt a wave of nervousness wash over me. Would they believe me? Would my story resonate with them? Taking a deep breath, I began to share my journey. I described the garden, the overwhelming love I felt in Jesus' presence, and the messages He had given me about living with love and purpose. As I spoke, I noticed tears streaming down the faces of some audience members. Others nodded in agreement, their expressions filled with understanding and encouragement. After the service, several people approached me to share how my story had touched their hearts. One woman, who had recently lost her husband, told me that my words had given her a renewed sense of hope and peace. Moments like these reminded me why it was so important to keep sharing, even when it felt difficult. In addition to speaking publicly, I found other ways to bring hope and light into the world. I began volunteering at a hospice center, where I spent time with patients who were nearing the end of their earthly lives. Many of them were afraid, uncertain about what lay ahead. I shared my story with them, describing the peace and joy I had experienced in heaven. For some, my words brought comfort and reassurance. For others, they sparked conversations about faith, forgiveness, and the meaning of life. One elderly woman, bedridden and frail, told me that hearing about heaven made her feel ready to let go. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for helping me see that death isn't the end." At school, I noticed how the way I approached challenges had changed. I no longer saw difficulties as obstacles but as opportunities for growth and connection. When a classmate struggled with a tough subject, I offered to help. When someone was being teased, I stood up for them. These small acts of kindness often led to deeper conversations, where I could share the love and hope that had been poured into me. Over time, I became known not just for my story but for my willingness to listen, to care, and to be there for others. One of the most transformative moments came during a youth group retreat. We were asked to reflect on what it meant to live with purpose and to think about how we could make a difference in the world. As I listened to the stories of my peers, I was struck by how much we all longed for the same things: love, connection, and a sense of belonging. When it was my turn to share, I spoke from the heart, recounting the lessons Jesus had taught me about living with love and faith. By the end of the retreat, several people came to me, saying they felt inspired to deepen their own faith and to approach life with a renewed sense of purpose. My mission wasn't limited to those in my immediate circle. As I grew older, I felt a calling to share my story more broadly. I began writing about my experience, capturing every detail of the garden, the light, and the words Jesus had spoken to me. Writing became a way to process my journey and to reach people I might never meet in person. The first time I held a copy of my published book in my hands, I felt a mix of pride and humility. This was more than a book. It was a testament to the love and hope that had transformed my life. The responses I received were overwhelming. Letters and emails poured in from people around the world who had read my story. Some shared their own near-death experiences, while others described how my words had given them the courage to face their own challenges. One woman wrote, "Your story came to me at a time when I felt lost and hopeless. It reminded me that I am loved, that my life has meaning, and that there is always hope, even in the darkest times." As the years passed, I began to see how the seeds I had planted were bearing fruit. Friends who had once been indifferent to faith began exploring their own spiritual journeys. Families who had experienced loss found comfort in the message of heaven's peace. Strangers who had read my book reached out to share how it had inspired them to live with more love and purpose. These moments reaffirmed what Jesus had told me in the garden, that even the smallest acts of love could have a profound and lasting impact. One evening, as I reflected on the path my life had taken, I realized how much I had grown since my near-death experience. I had gone from a scared, sick child to someone who understood the power of hope and the importance of living with intention. My life wasn't perfect, and I still faced struggles and uncertainties, but I no longer felt weighed down by fear or doubt. Instead, I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that I was part of a greater story. Living with an eternal perspective had changed everything. I no longer worried about when the world might end or what challenges the future might bring. Instead, I focused on making the most of each day, on loving God and others, and on being a light in the darkness. I understood that my time on earth was a gift, a chance to create ripples of love and hope that would continue long after I was gone. As I continued living with the purpose Jesus had instilled in me, I began to encounter situations that tested my faith and resolve. The world around me was filled with uncertainty, natural disasters, wars, and personal challenges that seemed to echo the signs Jesus had mentioned during my time in the garden. Yet, instead of being consumed by fear or despair, I found myself drawn to the promise of hope and renewal that Jesus had shared. This perspective helped me navigate the challenges of life with resilience and trust in God's greater plan. One of the most profound lessons I had learned was to find hope even in the darkest moments. This became especially important when my family faced a personal crisis. My father lost his job, and the financial strain put immense pressure on all of us. The atmosphere at home grew tense, and I could see the worry in my parents' eyes. Despite the uncertainty, I remembered Jesus' words, "I will always be with you." Those words became my anchor, and I shared them with my family during our most difficult moments. Together, we began praying as a family each evening, asking for guidance and strength. Though the situation didn't resolve overnight, we found a sense of peace in trusting that God would provide. During this time, I also saw how small acts of love could bring light to others in their own times of uncertainty. At school, a classmate named Jason, who was often teased for being quiet and withdrawn, caught my attention. One day, I decided to sit with him at lunch, offering a simple smile and a conversation. Over time, I learned that he was struggling with feelings of isolation and self-doubt. I shared my story with him, focusing not on the extraordinary aspects but on the love and hope that had changed my life. To my surprise, he began to open up, expressing his own struggles and a desire to find meaning. That connection grew into a friendship, and I watched as Jason gradually became more confident and engaged with others. His transformation reminded me that even the smallest gestures of kindness could have a lasting impact. The more I lived with hope, the more I noticed how it inspired others to do the same. At church, our youth group started a project to support families affected by a recent flood in a neighboring town. Many of the families had lost everything, and the devastation left them feeling hopeless. As we worked together to collect donations, organize relief efforts, and offer emotional support, I witnessed the power of community in action. One family, whose home had been completely destroyed, told us that our help had restored their faith in humanity. They expressed gratitude not just for the material support but for the love and compassion we had shown. This experience reinforced what Jesus had taught me, that living with love and purpose could bring a glimpse of heaven to earth. In moments of personal struggle, I leaned on prayer as a source of strength and clarity. One evening, overwhelmed by doubt about whether I was making a real difference, I knelt by my bed and poured out my heart to God. "Am I doing enough?" I asked. "Am I living the way you want me to?" As I prayed, I felt a familiar warmth and peace wash over me, a gentle reminder of Jesus' presence. The answer wasn't an audible voice but a quiet assurance that I was exactly where I needed to be. That moment gave me the courage to keep going, even when the path ahead felt uncertain. The theme of hope extended beyond my personal life and into my interactions with the larger community. I began volunteering at a center that provided support for people recovering from addiction. Many of the individuals I met there were grappling with feelings of guilt and hopelessness. Convinced that their past mistakes had defined them, I shared my story with them, focusing on the transformative power of love and forgiveness. One man, in particular, told me that hearing about my experience gave him the strength to believe that he could change. Over time, I watched him rebuild his life, finding purpose in helping others who were on the same journey. As I worked with people from all walks of life, I began to see how interconnected we all are. Every act of kindness, every word of encouragement, every choice to love instead of fear created ripples that extended far beyond what I could see. This understanding deepened my commitment to living with intention and reminded me that even small actions could contribute to something much greater. One of the most surprising lessons I learned during this time was how to find hope in failure. There were moments when my efforts seemed to fall short, times when I couldn't mend a broken relationship, help someone see their worth, or inspire the change I hoped for. In those moments, I felt frustrated and discouraged, wondering if I was truly making a difference. But each time, I returned to prayer, asking for guidance and perspective. Slowly, I began to understand that success wasn't always about immediate results. Sometimes, it was about planting seeds that would grow in their own time, in ways I might never see. This lesson became clear during a conversation with Emma, my best friend. She had always been supportive of my journey, but she struggled with her own questions about faith and purpose. One day, she confided in me that she felt distant from God and unsure of what she believed. I shared what I had learned about love, choice, and the importance of living with hope, but she remained hesitant. For a long time, I wondered if my words had reached her. Then, years later, she called me out of the blue to tell me that she had started exploring her faith and had found a new sense of peace. "You were right," she said. "God's love was always there, I just needed time to see it." Moments like these reminded me that hope wasn't just about the present but about trusting in the future. It was about believing that even when we couldn't see the full picture, our actions could contribute to something beautiful and lasting. This perspective helped me navigate the challenges of everyday life, from small setbacks to larger crises, with a sense of purpose and resilience. As I looked around at the world, I saw the signs Jesus had mentioned: wars, natural disasters, and people turning away from faith. Yet, I also saw incredible acts of kindness, courage, and love. I saw people coming together in times of crisis, strangers helping strangers, and communities rebuilding after devastation. These moments of light reminded me that hope was not only possible but essential. They were glimpses of the new heaven and earth Jesus had spoken of, signs that renewal and restoration were already at work. Living with hope in the face of uncertainty became a daily practice, a choice to trust in God's plan and to focus on the love and goodness around me. I realized that hope wasn't just a feeling, it was an action, a way of living that could inspire and uplift others. And as I continued on this journey, I felt a growing sense of peace, knowing that every step I took was part of something far greater than myself. As I continued my journey of living with purpose, I began to notice how my actions and words could build bridges between people. In a world often divided by misunderstandings and differences, the message of love and faith that Jesus had imparted to me became a tool for connection and healing. Whether through small, everyday interactions or larger, intentional efforts, I learned that bringing people together required patience, humility, and a willingness to listen. One of the most transformative moments came when I was invited to speak at a community center about my near-death experience. The audience was diverse, filled with people from different backgrounds, beliefs, and walks of life. I initially felt nervous, wondering how my story would resonate with those who didn't share my faith. But as I stood before them, I remembered Jesus' words, "Share God's love with others." Focusing on that message, I spoke not from a place of persuasion but from a place of authenticity, sharing how the experience had changed my life and given me a deeper understanding of love, hope, and purpose. Afterward, a man approached me with tears in his eyes. "I don't know if I believe in God," he said, "but what you said about love and living with purpose really spoke to me. It made me think about how I've been living my life and what I want to change." His words reminded me that building bridges wasn't about convincing others to see things my way. It was about opening a door for understanding and growth. At school, I noticed how small acts of kindness could create meaningful connections. There was a boy named Anthony who often sat alone at lunch. He had a reputation for being difficult to approach, and many students avoided him. One day, I decided to sit with him and strike up a conversation. At first, he was guarded, responding with short answers and avoiding eye contact. But as I continued to engage with him, sharing stories and asking about his interests, he began to open up. Over time, I learned that he had been bullied in the past and struggled with trust. Our conversations grew into a friendship, and I watched as his confidence and willingness to connect with others blossomed. Anthony's transformation taught me that even the smallest gestures of love could break down walls and build bridges of trust. Within my family, I also saw the importance of fostering connection. My parents, who had been deeply affected by the challenges we faced during my illness, often seemed weighed down by stress and worry. I began to look for ways to bring joy and unity into our home, cooking meals together, organizing family game nights, and encouraging open conversations about our feelings. These efforts helped us reconnect, reminding us that we were stronger together. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table laughing and sharing stories, my father said, "I don't know where we'd be without you. Sarah, you've brought so much light into our lives." In my community, I found opportunities to bridge divides through service. I volunteered at an after-school program that brought together children from different neighborhoods, many of whom came from challenging circumstances. At first, the kids were hesitant to interact with one another, sticking to groups that mirrored their own backgrounds. But through activities like team games, art projects, and group discussions, I watched as friendships began to form. One boy, who had been particularly reserved, told me, "I didn't think I'd fit in here, but now I feel like I have friends who understand me." Moments like these reinforced the idea that love and understanding could overcome even the deepest divisions. As I grew older, I began to see how bridging divides required more than just kindness, it also required listening. I met people who held beliefs that were vastly different from mine. And instead of avoiding those conversations, I approached them with curiosity and respect. I learned to ask questions, to truly hear their perspectives, and to find common ground. These interactions weren't always easy, but they deepened my understanding of others and strengthened my ability to share the message of love that Jesus had entrusted to me. One particularly memorable encounter was with a woman named Lila, who had lost her faith after experiencing a series of personal tragedies. She was skeptical of anything related to God or spirituality, but we found common ground in our shared desire to help others. Over time, our conversations turned to deeper topics, and I shared how my near-death experience had reshaped my understanding of life and purpose. Though she didn't fully embrace my perspective, she told me that our discussions had helped her feel less alone and more open to the idea of hope. "You've made me think differently," she said. "Maybe there's more to life than I've been willing to see." These experiences taught me that building bridges wasn't about erasing differences but about finding ways to connect despite them. It was about recognizing the humanity in each person and meeting them where they were. Whether through acts of service, meaningful conversations, or simply being present, I saw how the message of love could transcend barriers and create bonds that were both unexpected and transformative. One of the most powerful lessons I learned was that building bridges often required vulnerability. Sharing my story meant exposing my own fears, doubts, and struggles, but it also created space for others to do the same. By being honest about my journey, I found that people were more willing to share their own experiences and to explore the idea of hope and faith in their lives. This mutual openness became the foundation for many of the connections I formed, reminding me that love was at its strongest when it was authentic and unguarded. As I reflected on these experiences, I realized that the bridges I was building weren't just between individuals, they were also between heaven and earth. Every act of kindness, every moment of understanding, every choice to love instead of judge brought a piece of heaven into the world. These small glimpses of harmony and connection reminded me of the garden I had walked through with Jesus. A place where love reigned supreme and every being lived in perfect unity. Living with this perspective gave me a sense of hope that extended beyond my own life. I saw how the ripples of love and faith could spread through families, communities, and even across generations. I understood that the work I was doing wasn't just about the present, it was about contributing to something eternal. And as I continued to build bridges of love and faith, I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that I was living out the purpose Jesus had entrusted to me. As my journey continued, I began to encounter moments that tested my resolve to live with love and purpose. While my near-death experience had given me profound insights into the meaning of life and the power of hope, it didn't shield me from the challenges of everyday existence. Life was still filled with difficulties, disappointments, losses, and moments of doubt, but the lessons Jesus had taught me served as a guiding light, helping me navigate even the darkest times with faith and resilience. One of the first significant challenges came when my grandmother passed away. She had been one of the most important figures in my life, a source of wisdom and unconditional love. Her death left a void in our family, and the grief was palpable. Yet, as I mourned her loss, I found solace in the memory of my time in heaven. I remembered the peace and joy I had experienced there, and I held on to the promise that my grandmother was now in that same place, embraced by the love of God. While the pain of her absence was real, the hope of reunion brought comfort. I also leaned on the practice of prayer during this time. Prayer had become more than just a routine for me, it was a lifeline, a way to stay connected to the divine presence I had encountered in the garden. I often found myself speaking to Jesus as though he were right beside me, sharing my worries, fears, and hopes. These conversations brought a sense of peace. Even when the answers weren't immediately clear, they reminded me that I was never alone, no matter how difficult life seemed. Another challenge came in the form of setbacks and disappointments. I had always been a high-achieving student, but during my junior year of high school, I struggled with a particularly challenging math class. No matter how hard I studied, my grades didn't reflect the effort I was putting in. It was frustrating, and at times, I felt like a failure. But instead of letting the experience define me, I chose to see it as an opportunity for growth. I remembered Jesus' words about the importance of perseverance and faith, and I applied those lessons to my studies. While I didn't become a math prodigy overnight, I learned the value of persistence and the humility that comes from asking for help. My friendships also faced trials. As I grew more vocal about my faith and the lessons I had learned from my near-death experience, not everyone responded positively. Some friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the changes they saw in me. Their reactions hurt, but I understood that not everyone was ready to hear my story. Instead of focusing on the rejection, I chose to pray for them, trusting that God would work in their lives in His own time. At the same time, I found deeper connections with people who shared my desire to live with purpose and love. These new friendships became a source of encouragement and inspiration, reminding me of the importance of surrounding myself with those who uplifted and supported me. One of the most profound challenges came during my first year of college. For the first time, I was living away from home, surrounded by people from diverse backgrounds and belief systems. It was both exciting and overwhelming. I faced moments of doubt, questioning whether my faith could withstand the pressures of a new environment. But each time I felt uncertain, I returned to the foundation of love and hope that Jesus had given me. I joined a campus ministry group, where I found a supportive community of peers who encouraged me to grow in my faith while respecting the perspectives of others. Through these experiences, I learned the importance of sustaining faith not just in times of peace but also in times of struggle. I realized that faith wasn't about having all the answers or being free from doubt. It was about choosing to trust in God's love, even when life felt uncertain or overwhelming. This understanding helped me approach challenges with a sense of resilience and hope, knowing that every trial was an opportunity to deepen my relationship with God and to grow in love and compassion. One of the most surprising ways I found my faith strengthened was through acts of service. During a spring break mission trip, I traveled with a group of students to a small town recovering from a recent wildfire. The devastation was staggering, homes reduced to ashes, landscapes charred and barren. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was a sense of hope and determination. As we worked alongside the residents to clear debris and rebuild, I saw the power of community and the resilience of the human spirit. One woman, whose home had been completely destroyed, shared her story with me. Despite losing everything, she spoke of her gratitude for the support she had received and her hope for the future. Her faith inspired me, reminding me that even in the face of profound loss, love and hope could endure. These moments of service also deepened my understanding of what it meant to live with purpose. I realized that faith wasn't just about personal growth. It was about using the gifts I had been given to make a difference in the lives of others. Each act of kindness, no matter how small, was an opportunity to reflect God's love and bring a piece of heaven to earth. Whether it was comforting someone in need, volunteering my time, or simply offering a listening ear, I saw how these actions could create ripples of hope that extended far beyond what I could see. As I reflected on these experiences, I began to see how the challenges I faced were shaping me into the person I was meant to become. Each trial, whether big or small, was an opportunity to grow in love, faith, and resilience. I understood that the lessons Jesus had taught me in the garden weren't just for a moment, they were meant to guide me throughout my entire life, equipping me to navigate the complexities of the world with grace and purpose. One evening, as I sat watching the sunset, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey I had been on. The vibrant colors of the sky reminded me of the beauty I had seen in heaven, and the gentle breeze carried a sense of peace that felt like a whisper from God. I realized that sustaining faith wasn't about avoiding challenges, it was about embracing them as part of the journey. Trusting that every step was leading me closer to the fullness of God's love and purpose. As the years unfolded, the lessons I had learned during my near-death experience remained a constant source of guidance and strength. Each step of my journey, with its joys and challenges, reaffirmed the truths Jesus had shared with me in the garden, that life's purpose lies in love, that hope can illuminate even the darkest moments, and that our time on earth is part of a greater story, woven into eternity. Looking back, I could see how the experiences I had faced, loss, uncertainty, rejection, and growth, were all pieces of a divine plan, shaping me into the person I was becoming. Each challenge served as an opportunity to practice the principles of love, faith, and resilience. They reminded me that the lessons Jesus had imparted were not just ideals to admire but calls to action, meant to be lived out in the messiness and beauty of everyday life. One of the most profound lessons I carried with me was the understanding that no act of love is ever wasted. Whether it was comforting a grieving friend, standing up for someone in need, or simply offering a kind word to a stranger, I saw how each small gesture had the potential to ripple outward, creating waves of hope and connection. This realization shaped the way I approached my relationships, my work, and my interactions with the world around me. As I grew older, I began to share my story more widely, speaking at churches, community events, and schools. Each time I shared, I was struck by the diversity of people who resonated with the message. Some were deeply rooted in faith, while others were skeptical or searching for meaning. Yet, across all these differences, there was a common thread, a longing for hope, connection, and a sense of purpose. It was humbling to see how my story, a single thread in the vast tapestry of God's plan, could touch so many lives. One of the most meaningful experiences came when I visited a hospice center to speak with patients and their families. Many of them were grappling with the uncertainty of death, their hearts heavy with questions about what lay beyond. As I shared my experience of heaven, the peace, the joy, and the love that permeated everything, I saw their faces soften, their fears giving way to a sense of comfort and hope. One woman, holding the hand of her dying husband, told me that my words had given her the strength to let go, knowing that he was moving toward a place of unimaginable beauty and love. Another moment that left a lasting impression on me came during a conversation with a young girl who had recently lost her mother. She was struggling to make sense of her grief, torn between anger and sadness. I listened as she poured out her heart, and when she finally asked, "Do you think my mom is okay?" I shared what I had seen and felt in heaven. I told her that love never ends, that her mother was surrounded by peace and joy, and that one day, they would be reunited. Her tears turned to a quiet smile, and in that moment, I was reminded of the incredible power of hope to heal even the deepest wounds. As I continued to reflect on my journey, I began to see how my near-death experience had not only changed my perspective on life but also deepened my understanding of time. Jesus' words about living each day with love and purpose had taken root in my heart, reminding me that the present moment is a gift, an opportunity to make choices that reflect God's love. This mindset helped me approach even the smallest aspects of life, doing chores, running errands, or spending time with loved ones, with gratitude and intention. My faith also grew in unexpected ways. I came to see that faith wasn't about having all the answers or living without doubt. It was about trusting in God's presence, Even when life felt uncertain or overwhelming, it was about leaning into love, choosing hope over fear, and remembering that I was never alone. This understanding helped me navigate the complexities of adulthood, from career decisions to relationships, with a sense of peace and resilience. As the years turned into decades, I watched the world continue to change. There were moments of progress and unity, but also times of division and hardship. Yet, through it all, I held onto the vision of the new heaven and earth that Jesus had shown me, a world where love reigns supreme, where pain and sorrow are no more, and where all of creation exists in perfect harmony. This vision gave me the strength to keep living with hope, knowing that every act of love, no matter how small, was part of building that reality. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset, I thought about the countless lives I had encountered and the stories they had shared with me. I thought about the people who had been inspired by my journey, the friends who had found faith, and the strangers whose burdens had been lightened by a simple act of kindness. I realized that my life had become a testament to the truths Jesus had revealed, that love is the foundation of everything, that hope has the power to transform, and that even in the face of uncertainty, we are never alone. As I neared the end of my earthly life, I felt a deep sense of peace. I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead, because I knew that death wasn't the end, it was a transition, a homecoming. I remembered Jesus' promise that he would always be with me, and I knew that when the time came, he would be there to welcome me with open arms. On my final day, surrounded by family and friends, I felt the same warmth and light that had enveloped me in the garden all those years ago. It was as if heaven itself was drawing near, reminding me of the love that had carried me through every moment of my journey. As I closed my eyes, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the life I had lived, the people I had loved, and the purpose I had found. And then, just as it had before, the light welcomed me home.